back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. Our last episode ended with Derek agreeing to pay to correct a mistake that never should have happened. When Brian and Heather decided to cut costs by going with a basic gas water heater instead of a tankless, and a gas furnace instead of a heat pump, Derek assured them it was no big deal. However, the spray foam insulation installer got nearly halfway through in the attic before he noticed these issues. Then his boss showed up to take a look and broke the news to Derek. Either replace the water heater and furnace, which would probably cost Derek $10,000, or pay them $3,000 to scrape off the foam insulation that's already been sprayed and start over with fiberglass insulation, which won't trap carbon monoxide in the attic and create a potentially deadly hazard. After some back and forth with Brian and Heather, Derek agreed to cover the cost of scraping and replacing the insulation. He knows his wife is going to be upset. They just can't afford to spend that kind of money. A few months have passed since the insulation debacle, and Heather's due date is getting close. She's been visiting the job site less and less as her energy levels have plummeted. But they got a call from Derek, and for the first time in a few weeks, she's feeling excited about the house again. According to Derek, it's time to start making selections for the home. Even at his previous job out in the suburbs, homeowners typically got pretty excited about this part, and Derek is hoping that this will lift everyone's moods. Overall, this is normally one of the most exciting parts of the process. Plus, Derek is hoping Brian and Heather will get distracted enough by making selections to get them out of his hair for a bit. In addition to eating the insulation mistake, Derek's finances were already getting tight. To help make things up, he decided to take on a couple of remodel projects in the neighborhood, despite having originally promised Brian and Heather that they will be his one and only clients during this build. But things have changed for him, and now he's going to do what he has to do for his family. Ever since the project started, neighbors with their own upcoming projects have seen his sign in the yard and stopped by to ask whether Derek could help them out. Until about a month ago, he declined, but money's now short, so now he has 2 new projects in the neighborhood, and some distance from Brian and Heather right now is perfect for pulling it all off. Meanwhile, Brian and Heather have decided to shave down costs and start to search for their home selections online. With Heather's feet on his lap, Brian goes back and forth between rubbing his pregnant wife's sore feet, searching for appliances, and asking for her approval. It doesn't take long for the sheer number of decisions to get incredibly overwhelming. Heather has a style in mind, but now she realizes it's time to make some definitive choices. Of course, she could swap the finishes out later on, but she'd rather not plan on spending more money down the line just because she can't make up her mind today. Ugh, how do people do this, she says. Is there someone who can help with this kind of stuff, Brian asks. Remember how I was talking to Sarah the other day? She mentioned that her sister, Vivian, is an interior designer. Maybe she can help. Brian realizes that hiring an interior designer is going to be yet another expense. But Heather's eyes lit up with the idea, and there's no way he's going to ruin his very pregnant, very stressed wife's joy. Heather gets Vivian on the phone, and they begin discussing their home, where they are in the process, and what selections still need to be made. Vivian asks some really great questions and agrees to take them on as clients. The next morning, Heather is thrilled that she and Brian are on their way to their first official meeting with the interior designer. Vivian welcomes them into her home office. She has shelves full of design books, fabric swatches, and beautiful hand-drawn renderings pinned to the walls. Heather starts by letting Vivian know they've already ordered all the kitchen appliances and even bought a few of the light fixtures online. Vivian pauses because she's seen this scenario before, and it rarely ends well. Where did you buy all this stuff from, she asks. Brian and Heather tell her, well, the appliances came from a local big box electronics store, which was having a clearance sale, and the light fixtures came from a home improvement website. Vivian looks through the detailed receipts on Brian's phone that he's just handed her, and suddenly Brian and Heather notice her eyes narrow and then shift from the prints on the table and back to Brian's phone. And after checking back and forth, Vivian says, are these the final plans and accurate dimensions? Yep, Brian and Heather say. Well, the refrigerator is a different size than what the plans show, and the door swing on the wine fridge is backwards, and your laundry room is set up for a stacked washer and dryer, but you ordered top load. And these light fixtures, they seem to be the wrong scale for the room sizes and for the ceiling heights. Heather's turning red with embarrassment. She can barely believe they ordered all that stuff incorrectly. Can't we just alter the plans a little bit to work with what we bought? Those appliances were on clearance, and we can't return them. I think they were discontinued models even. Possibly, Vivian says, but changing the plans isn't always that easy at this point, especially since all of your wiring and plumbing are in place. Let's see what orders we can cancel or return and start from the beginning. Vivian wants to lift the young couple's spirits, and she presents presenting them with some mood boards she created. Yes, that's exactly what I've been envisioning, Heather says. How did you know? Well, I just put some ideas together last night after we talked. How do you feel about this, Brian? Is this the direction that you want to go? Yeah, it looks great, Brian says, really not to just be making progress, but to see Heather so happy since these last few weeks of pregnancy have been rough. The next day, Brian, Heather, and Vivian visit the job site together, and Derek happens to be there too. Derek and Vivian introduce themselves and smile, but Brian and Heather notice that he seems to be a little annoyed with Vivian's presence. As they go from room to room, Vivian tries to keep her voice to a whisper when speaking to Brian and Heather. Despite not being needed at this stage, she notices Derek is trailing a few feet behind. In the master bathroom, she notices there's only one electrical outlet at the vanity. When she mentions this to Derek, he just looks at her and shrugs and says, well, that's what's on the plans. She also points out that the placement of the shower valve and the shower head aren't going to work with their selection, and that the wrong type of rough-in valve was installed in the wall for the shower controls. Derek says, but you didn't even tell me this is what you wanted. This is standard stuff that I put in. How am I supposed to know it's going to be something special? Brian and Heather are starting to tense up with anger, but Vivian does her best to keep them calm. She says that they all need to keep looking forward rather than focusing on mistakes. She'll send a list of all the changes and issues to Derek tonight, and he agrees to work through them. After reviewing Vivian's list, Derek meets with all the subcontractors who need to come fix the issues. Within a few days, he emails a breakdown of the costs for Brian and Heather to review. Brian adds them all up, and the total is another $6,500 to fix Derek's oversights. Not wanting to get Heather riled up so close to her due date, Brian steps out into the backyard and calls Derek. Derek, Brian says, I know you've had to eat a lot of costs, and I appreciate you covering those, but you have now caused another $6,500 worth of mistakes, and we just aren't going to pay for that. Derek says, look, I know I'm new, and yeah, there were some minor mistakes on that list, but most of those items are where you didn't give me your information, or you changed your mind. Your designer comes in here and wants all this special stuff that isn't even on the plans. How am I supposed to anticipate what she wants? Besides, I just cannot afford to keep paying for this stuff. Honestly, I'm barely going to break even on this house if I'm lucky. At this point, Brian is feeling defeated. He knows Derek can't afford it. But their savings account is now dangerously low, and soon they're not going to be able to afford to make double mortgage payments. He's already made up his mind to suck it up and ask his dad to loan him more money to keep them afloat. After another design meeting at Vivian's office, Brian and Heather are starting to feel a little better again. Despite Heather's due date being just around the corner, she's in pretty good spirits and wants to accomplish as much as possible before the baby arrives. Her sister agreed to babysit that night so they could get in one last dinner date, so Brian and Heather decided to drive by the construction site on their way home. They park out front and talk for a little while before deciding to check out the neighborhood a bit before heading back home. A few blocks away, Brian stops the car and takes a photo with his phone. There's a shiny new sign that says Derek Swanson Construction in another house's yard. No wonder there have been mistakes, Brian says. He's taken on more projects. Brian, Heather says through a few deep breaths, I think we just need to let it go and deal with it later. No, Brian insists. I'm going to call him right now. Brian, Heather cuts him off. Drop it. I think my water just broke. And with that, Brian rushes Heather to the hospital, calling her sister on the way home to let her know they won't be home in a bit as promised. Did the baby come just in time to get Derek off the hook for taking these side jobs? Tune in next time to find out. Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. On this show, we teach that every successful construction project has 4 key components, which are illustrated by a simple outline drawing of a house. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. Have all 4 of these components and your project will succeed. Well, today we have a designer on the show. We have Shannon Vestal with Steve Shannon Designs. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And Steve Shannon is a residential design firm, and they cover architectural drawings, interiors, the whole shooting match from start to finish, right?
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you and Steve came together and kind of what you guys do?
Steve and I actually met through a custom home builder back in 2015. He had already done the design for this particular builder's model home. And then I was hired to come in and make all the selections for the home. So when we started working on that project, Steve saw that there might be a way to introduce me into a lot of his projects that he was working on, in getting a little bit more in the weeds, as I would call it, in the design of the home and some of the questions that I would ask the clients as far as the design of the home. And started out doing about 10 hours of my time on those projects, and then things just started taking off. And pretty soon it was, you know what, this kind of makes sense. We should team up and just offer this as a full service. And so it wasn't hire one or the other, it was hire us both. So we got pretty slammed right after Harvey. We were probably, I don't know, we had 3 people a day coming in to interview us. And as you and I both know, Meyerland was pretty much where we lived, so to speak, after Harvey. I feel like that really got us going out there. And ever since then, we've tweaked some things and tried to make our business better. It's been great. We love it. Steve's been designing homes for 30 years. He designed his first home when he was 20 years old.
Wow.
And he's a residential designer. He is not an architect, so he cannot design commercial projects.
Right.
But he has designed a lot of homes. So my part is not only helping with the design of the home and some of the little details, I also then follow up with all the selections. So I'll work with the client and the builder to get all the selections made for the home, get them to the builder before you need it is my goal.
So do you guys have kind of an overall design philosophy when it comes to working with clients?
Well, oftentimes people ask us what our style is. If you look on our house page, we don't have a style. I tell people, and Steve agrees, whatever their style is what our style is. If we did the same thing over and over again, it would get pretty boring. Our philosophy is when you come in, be open-minded and enjoy the process. I think that's the biggest of everything I can think of in designing a home. I feel like people struggle with that, definitely in the beginning. You and I both know it's a large investment, and so it can be a little nerve-wracking, but I know we'll talk about this later, but if you get the right team together, it should be a fun process.
There's a story that we've been following on this podcast of a couple who is going through this process of building a home, and they just try to do everything themselves. They get their house plans on the internet. Her sister's a wannabe interior designer. I'm using the air quotes for people who are listening, which we see a lot of that kind of approach, unfortunately. So tell us, why should somebody work with a professional designer instead of just trying to do it themselves?
Oh my goodness. There's a lot of reasons.
We have lots of time.
All right. Well, part of it goes back to the team approach in getting your builder, your architect, or home designer, and interior designer all together. All 3 of those people need to work on the project from day one. The interior designer oftentimes gets the bad rap of being the one that's going to come in and blow your budget.
Right.
Being super expensive. No, we can't afford a designer. Hence,
right.
We'll do it ourselves, or we'll get, my sister or my aunt or whatever to help us with selections. And I start to bring up things to clients like, well, I know you think it's going to be fun because you're going to get to pick out tile and countertops and paint. And while that is fun and the lighting, your builder also is going to need to know what kind of interior doors you want. Do you want them stained? Do you want them painted? What kind of baseboards? Do you want the outlets in the baseboards? What type of finish do you want on the sheetrock? I try to throw out
a million decisions that
right,
they're not aware of.
Exactly. And I try to throw out the ones that are, which I've learned a lot of people think it is just a standard. And that's what they say. Well, that's not standard. I said, there is custom home. There is no standard. And while there might be certain things that are standard, quote unquote, with the builder, whether it's the framing or the guts of the home, everything else that goes into that home, somebody needs to have a discussion about it and know what that's going to be. You as the builder need to know what to tell your sheetrockers and your painters.
Yeah. I mean, my quote unquote standard might not be the same as what's in the client's mind as they think should be standard.
Yes, absolutely. And I found that with baseboards. And door casings. That was one of the bigger ones. And even if you're going from builder to builder while you're searching for your builder, each one could have different, as you say, standards. And so what might be an upgrade to one builder may not be to another. That's one of the first things. Other thing is you can pick out a tile. Your aunt can help you pick out the tile, but there's more to it than just handing your builder the list of from Dow Tile or wherever it is you went to make your selections. It's how do you want that tile installed? Do you want it vertical? Do you want it horizontal? Are we doing a herringbone pattern?
What trim pieces
size?
Go with it?
Absolutely. Are we doing, Schluter strips? What are Schluter strips? I mean, the common person, we rarely do bullnose edge tile anymore.
Right.
What size grout joint do you want? Not to mention grout color. All of those things have to be relayed to the builder. Because again, the tile guy shows up and he's got to have a plan and there is no standard.
Right.
So those are things that your designer is going to help you with. Lighting can be one that they all look so pretty when you walk in the showroom. And rarely have I think, made a final selection with a client from a fixture that's hanging in the showroom. I always tell people those are more of a reference point for size, maybe for the finish, the amount of light it puts out. But typically we end up going to catalogs or going online and I'm sending them other options.
Yeah.
God, there's so much to it. There's a lot to it. And being able to really pull the whole thing together. I think you can focus on, what you want your master bathroom to look like because of photos that you found on Pinterest or Houzz. But does the style of that bathroom go with the style of the rest of the house?
Right.
Even the exterior of the house. And all of that's got to go together.
Yeah. So having a cohesive design concept for the whole house. If someone just goes to the tile store and then they go to the granite store and then they go to the lighting place,
right.
They might pick out 10 different things that don't necessarily work well together.
Absolutely. And a lot of the showrooms do have interior designers that work there that are very helpful. But that designer at the tile showroom doesn't know what you may or may not have already selected or going to select at the countertop showroom.
Yeah, they don't have the plans for the house. They don't know what the overall style of the home is. There's so many things that they can't know.
Absolutely. A lot of it comes down to how does your home function? How do you live? And we've got clients that have, 3 young kids, 2 dogs. They're going to have a swimming pool. And we're having conversations about what type of flooring we're going to put in that house because there's pros and cons to all of them. And so you really have to dig deep to really learn more about their life because there's lots of beautiful products out there and you don't have to spend a lot of money on them to still accomplish the look of maybe your inspiration photo. But you also want it to be durable. I mean, I hear that word all the time. We want low maintenance.
Right.
And these days, as fast paced as life is, I think we all want everything possible in life to be low maintenance.
Yeah. So the level of product knowledge is a big component of that. Like you mentioned, just kind of knowing that you don't just pick a white Carrera marble tile. There's a million options just within that one tile. The size, like you said, the size of the tile, the way, the direction it lays, the edge, the grout joint. I mean, there's thousands or tens of thousands of individual decisions to be made on a custom home. And while some people can definitely grasp the big things, go pick the appliances, for example, they can't know all the little things that go into that.
Right.
And even with the appliances, though, you have to know what kind of cabinets are you doing? How are they going to be installed? What's the dimensions, the proper dimensions? How's it going to vent? Right.
Right. Well, and one thing that I think also benefits folks to hire an interior designer is we stay on top of new products hitting the market. A lot of these, especially the bigger vendors, which they do with builders too, they send us to the corporate office, the factory, and we sit through 2 or 3 days of training. We see the product. We go through the factory. We see how the products are made. I remember going to Kohler and doing their training a few years ago. And believe it or not, it makes you appreciate a a toilet a whole lot more. I mean, when you see these guys out there with a wet sponge smoothing this
Yeah.
toilet that just came out of a mold. I mean, so the product knowledge is a big part of it. And I always tell people, you want to know, you don't want your house that you're going to that's going to be finished, let's say in 2023, we're in 2022. Their house is going to be finished in 23, but your inspiration photos that you showed me when we first got started are best guess Pinterest 2019.
Yeah.
And you can't even guarantee
earlier.
that, right?
Yeah.
We don't know when those pictures were posted.
Yeah.
So do you really want to move into a house in 23 and already have it dated?
Yeah.
So I tell people, you want me to go take you to a tile showroom where the salespeople that I work with there say, hang on a second, Shannon, we just got something in yesterday. Let me go get it. Because they know I want to show my client the latest product. Now, they may bring it out and my client looks at me like I've lost my mind, but I'm saying just bear with me. Let's get through this whole process, but I'm there to push you out of your comfort zone. And it's okay to tell me you don't like it. It's not going to hurt my feelings. But at the end of the day, when all of your selections are made and you're moving into that home, you want to feel like, wow, no one else has this. My friends are coming over. They're going, oh my God, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
That's what a designer can do for you. And make sure that you're putting products in your home that are, I guess, like I said before, not only functional, but durable and are going to last you for a while. I mean,
Right.
you don't want to, a few years in, go, oh my God, honey, we're going to have to rip this out and remodel.
Yeah.
So I don't think honey would be real happy if that happened.
Yeah. If you had only spent $1 more per square foot, it would have lasted longer.
Steve, I've heard Steve tell people this oftentimes. He said, with the amount of money that you're going to pay Shannon to get through this process and get all your selections made, she will save you that and plus some in the end.
Yeah.
And that kind of would lead us into, budget. And I use that word maybe more than a lot of interior designers do, but
Yeah.
I've just seen it happen so many times with people going over budget, and there's no reason for that to happen.
Yeah. I think that's people's biggest fear when they think about working with a designer is, oh, this designer is going to push me to spend way too much money. And honestly, there are a lot of designers that do that.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure.
Yes.
I've got plenty of horror stories about a designer blowing up a job, either from the budget going crazy or coming in and changing everything at the last minute, right?
Oh my gosh. So then your client incurs the change orders, which weren't their fault.
Right. So having somebody, who is, I'll use the term grounded, who is grounded in reality in, hey, people actually do have a budget. You're not designing every house for somebody that lives in the most expensive neighborhood in town. Most of the houses that we do and you do are, I think most people would consider them high end or luxury, but honestly, in this market, they're kind of middle of the road houses,
Right.
$800,000 to $1.5 million. It's a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of a middle of the road house for Houston.
Yeah, these days.
For a custom home.
I agree.
And so, we're not dealing with the super rich guy. We're dealing with people who actually have a budget.
And I even tell people, because I've got a good friend that works for a super, super crazy high-end home builder. And, when I hear the budgets they're talking about, they still have clients that push back when they present a budget.
Sure.
Even if it's, so if it's, here's the budget, it's 15 million. Oh, well, we were really hoping to be more around 12 million. I mean, everybody has a budget. And to me, that's what can make the project not fun. Just talking budget. I mean, like I said, people can show me photos. It might be a tile on there that's $20 a square foot that they're showing me. But I tell them, if your builder's giving me a $5 a square foot budget, we'll make it happen and we'll find you something.
Right.
There's way too many products in the market that just sometimes it might take a little more digging, but it's doable.
Sure. I mean, yeah, there's a ton of products out there that are kind of made to have that crazy expensive look that are really very affordable. You just have to know the right sources to find them.
Right.
And not to buy crap, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's an education process. I mean, if your family that we're talking about here, this family that we've been talking about, do they have a name?
Yeah, Brian and Heather.
Brian and Heather. So Heather goes out, she's dropped the kids off at Mother's Day out, and she's like, I'm going to go make tile selections today. If she just goes and doesn't work with a salesperson at any of these tile showrooms and just makes selections. And then she brings them to you and she says, here, Curtis, this is the tile for my bathroom floor. And you look at it and it's a ceramic tile. Your immediate is going to go, I really wouldn't. Do they have it in porcelain or she brings you marble and says, this is my, kitchen countertop.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we'd be more than happy to install that for you, but
not a good choice.
I need to educate you. And then you become not only the builder, but because you don't want to just put it in, right? You don't want it later. She moves in and you and I both know what's going to happen to that marble countertop in the kitchen when she spills red wine on it. And then who's going to get the call? It's going to be you. Why didn't you tell me that this would stain? So all sorts of those product education. And I rely a lot on the vendors. I tell them that. And that's why I go to certain vendors is because of the product knowledge. I can't know all of it. I don't want to know all of it.
Yeah.
So there are times when we are at showrooms that I'll look to my salesperson and say, you know what, can you answer that? I can't. I don't know the answer to that. There's just so much more to the products out there than I think people realize.
Yeah, and having good vendors is important too, because people will say, "Hey, I found this tile. It looks just the same. It's $2 a square foot cheaper at this other place." And I'll say, we need to stick with my vendors because we have a relationship. I trust the sales reps. I trust that if there's a problem with the product, we can return it, exchange it. They'll stand behind it. That guy over there, they're selling leftovers, seconds. There's issues with it. They have bad customer service. They promise it's in stock. It's not. So,
I'm sure you and I both have plenty of horror stories with that scenario.
So, we have our preferred vendors and occasionally we'll venture outside of that if we can kind of vet them and make sure that they're legit. But that's part of what you get working with somebody like you is you know the good vendors.
And a lot of times it's the same. If I compared what I would say is my preferred vendor list to yours, I would be
probably
willing
lots
to bet
of overlap. Yeah.
We've got a lot of the same ones on there.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes along with also the quality level of the builder, the designer is probably going to have a comparable quality vendor list, whereas a cheap builder, a bad builder, a cheap designer, bad designer is probably going to be using the cheaper places.
Absolutely. One of the things I mentioned earlier, and I know maybe we wanted to touch on was, when I mentioned the team approach and that going back to budget and you being involved in the beginning, designing the home so that we're talking numbers from day one.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I really harped on in the beginning and these builders really looked at me like I was crazy when I said, I really want to sit in on your presentation of this preliminary budget. And, I get it. It was probably like, what? It's not really any of your business what my budget looks like. But the more I explained that it is a lot of my business because I was the one that when we hit the tile showroom and of course, they make a beeline to the most expensive tile and I have to say, no, that's not in budget. No, that's not in budget. No, you can't have that. No, you can't have that.
Why is my budget so low?
And I got hissy fits. Yes, temper tantrums thrown in the middle of the tile showroom. And I'm looking at them like, I'm sorry. I'm just here to tell you it's not in budget. If you want it, absolutely, we'll do it. But just know you're going to be over budget. And if we do this at every selection appointment, you're going to be miserable by the end of this process.
Yep.
And so if we can get together from day one and start talking numbers and design a house that's in budget and not a house that's X numbers per square foot, this is the house we want. This is the style. This is how much money we have to spend. You're not going to spend it all. I think people are afraid if they say, our budget's $1 million, Curtis, you and I are going to spend every bit of that $1 million.
Right.
It's like, for me, I tell people it's kind of a challenge if I can get you under that. What if I can get you every selection and you're happy with everything and Curtis can build and we're at, $5 under that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we want to do. And it's being transparent, but
that's not going to happen unless we're all at the table at the beginning because, Steve's experienced, but Steve doesn't necessarily know, he doesn't stay up on a daily basis on the current costs to build various things.
Absolutely.
And, and he also doesn't stay up on maybe the interior stuff. And I don't stay up on the interior stuff like you do. So having all of us at the table together allows us just to say right off the bat, that's, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, that's not a realistic budget, for what you're telling us you want.
Right. And
Right.
they're only having to tell the story once. Like,
Right.
come in with those photos, come in with just all the information. And this is what we want to do. And if we're all sitting in that meeting together, we're all seeing those photos at the same time. We can all say, well, pick the photos apart. What is it about it? Oh, it's
Yeah.
the windows. Okay. Well, that's a 20-foot slider. That right there is, you can throw
Yeah.
them a number.
Yep.
I can throw them numbers on some things and say, we're not telling you can't do it. Just keep that in mind as we move forward. There might be something else down the road that's more important to you than that slider. We are in Houston and it's 100 degrees.
You're probably not going to open that very often.
No, it looks cool and it looks really cool on that photo, but being realistic. Foundation's always a big one, when we start talking about the style of homes or the roof on some of the modern homes. And I feel like that's where builders can come in and say, yeah, that does look cool, but just know that's going to kick up your number just
Yeah.
to have a cool roof. So how important is it?
Yeah. So I'd rather kind of nip that in the bud early instead of going all the way through design. And then I get a set of plans. Then I've got to break somebody's heart that
And that's what we're
you
really,
can't
really
build that.
trying. Yes. And that's what we are really, really trying to convey to people is just be transparent and open with your numbers from day one. It will serve you well. By the time that house is finished, you should have a house that you're so excited and happy about, and it was in budget.
Yeah. I think, being transparent is definitely important. We always ask that question, like that's on our questionnaire that we give people. It's one of the first questions is, what is your budget? But I think that also trying to get people to be realistic and understand that things cost what they cost. I mean, I might charge a little more or a little less than the next builder, but my profit, my fee is probably not going to be what makes or breaks that house. It's going to be the design of the house, what's in the house. And so if your budget is $1 million, then don't be ashamed of that. It's a lot of money, right? Don't be ashamed of that. But be realistic in that I'm not going to get $1.5 million house for $1 million. I have to temper my expectations and realize that, hey, I can't get that 20-foot slider, and I can't get the 60-inch Sub-Zero, fridge and wolf range.
And then I think on the other side of that is you probably have clients that come to you and say our budget is, $600,000 or $700,000, and then they start telling you what size house, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms. They kind of just give you an overall, and we want a modern home. When they do that with us, we look at them and say, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And here's why. Sometimes they don't have a builder yet. So it's just them coming in to, talk to us. So we go ahead and tell them because why would you want to go through the process and have an architect or designer and get this great floor plan designed, this beautiful modern home, and then they bring it to you and, you don't know that their budget's, let's say $700,000, and you spend your time and come back with $1.1 million,
yeah.
or 1.5. There's no shaving some money off to get them back to where they would like to be. If the budget's $1 million and we're a little over, then we can go back and look at some numbers. But then they're back to now what? They've spent, $30,000 or more and hiring somebody to design this home, and they've got to start over or scrap it. And at $700,000, my thought is you don't have extra money sitting around to have a whole nother house designed. So I would want somebody to at least explain that to me up front and then decide, okay, do we want to continue and do we want to go through with this? Or at least say, okay, well, I guess we'd be willing to give up a bathroom and maybe do a little bit different style home, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So again, it's an education process.
Yeah. I think one problem or one mistake people make when they don't hear what they want to hear sometimes is like, oh, I can find somebody that'll do it for that price, right? So
And you can find somebody that will tell you they can do it for that price.
exactly, and that's what I run into a lot on my consulting side with Shepherd, which is who hosts this podcast. Is we get calls from people who believed that guy that said, oh, I can build that 1.1 house for 700, and then 18 months into it, we get a phone call and it's a disaster. It's like if somebody wants to buy a BMW. And they go to the Ford dealer and demand a BMW, and the Ford sales guy's like, okay, well, I can turn this Ford into a BMW.
Right. We could trick out this Fusion over here and maybe make it
right. It's never going to be a BMW.
Yeah, exactly.
So, other than people just trying to do things themselves, and some of the mistakes that we talked about so far, what are some like common mistakes that you see clients make? Maybe it's in design or in process. What are some common mistakes?
If they have a designer or don't have a designer?
Those people who try to do it themselves. Sorry.
Okay.
I should have qualified that.
Okay. Oh my goodness. We've covered some of them as far as, going in, just try and make these selections on their own. Something that also happens probably 9 times out of 10 on these jobs is the selections aren't made in a timely manner. So if you've got a construction loan, we know there's a time on that loan. And so that house has got to be built in 12
to 18 months, usually somewhere in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So you just can't make up your mind on the tile, and you can't make up your mind on the door hardware. Meanwhile, your builder's been emailing you and reminding you, hey, we really need that. We really need that. At some point, you're going to show up to your house thinking you're going to have all these, like an anthill and all these workers and things are going, and it's dead. They can't wait. Their tile guy's ready. They've got him scheduled. They know when they need him, but the tile's not there, and he's got to move on to another job. And you may not get him back for a couple of months, depending on where he goes. So by not being able to get those selections done in a timely manner and get them to your builder, and like I mentioned before, all the information that goes along with those selections, you potentially are costing yourself more money. So that $1 million home, if it's not finished in 12 to 18 months, it's costing more money. Chances are the builder is charging for every day that you don't have the selection. I mean, I know all builders are different as far as that goes, but at some point you have to put the pressure on and get the selections.
And the problem now is like supply chain. It's like if you don't pick it in time, that could really mess your project up.
I'm ready to quit talking about supply chain.
I am too.
Is that going to happen?
I'm sick of it.
I'm so over it. But I see things slowly improving. I slowly.
In some areas, yeah.
Yeah, on some.
Appliances are still a mess.
And windows, I've heard, are still.
They're getting better. I got an email this week from an appliance rep that we deal with a lot, and he said, and I won't mention the brand, but one major brand still will not give a definitive lead time. They'll say, well, you'll get it in 12 months, but we're not guaranteeing that.
Yep.
So
I think I know who you're talking about.
It's like we're in the same position that we were with them a year ago. They just, or 2 years ago, they just won't give you a date. So if those kind of things aren't, chosen at the very beginning of the project before the foundation ever gets poured, order your appliances. And if that doesn't happen, you're screwed.
And they look at me like, even before supply chain was an issue, when I'd say our first appointments are going to be plumbing and appliances, and they look at me like, why would we look at appliances now? We're not going to need those for 10 months. It's like, okay, but then I have to go through the reasons why we need to pick out plumbing and appliances first. Yeah, I think I just can't imagine what builders do with clients who don't have a designer. What do you just hand them a list of these are the things that we're going to need you to make selections for and get us back? And do you give them a schedule? How does that work?
I don't know.
Yeah, I know there are some builders now that are they're insisting that you have a designer.
Yeah.
if they're going to build your home.
Yeah, I mean, we don't do a job without a designer. We won't. And there's too many details, and we don't have time to do it ourselves,
Right.
and we don't want the customer to do it themselves. So yeah, we won't do a project unless a designer's involved, and a legit designer, not my sister watches HGTV and she's a aspiring designer.
Yes, I agree. Well, and I think some things that I know they've come up even with my clients, and obviously I am the designer on the project. And, you know, we could be at framing already and electrical's complete. And then they all of a sudden say, well, I don't know, just walking through the house, I'm thinking, what if, could we possibly change this, this, and this? And as a builder, having to address that and spend time and why it doesn't make sense to change it or why they shouldn't change or it can't be changed. But that's something I've been able to address and the builder never even knows it. I
Yeah,
mean, maybe later over happy hour, I can say, let me just tell you where I saved you on this one.
we
That you
appreciate
didn't
that.
even have to do. Right. But things do come up. And so I think for a designer to get in there, really help people to understand what the overall design of the home and the look is. And let's get in and make selections and keep them moving. And as long as the people can stay excited about it and get excited for the next appointment and checking things off the list, um, they seem to have a good time.
Yeah,
So it doesn't have to break the bank. And yes, are there designers out there that charge $300-400 an hour with a minimum of 100 hours? Yes,
yes,
I've seen the quotes.
yeah,
But like you said earlier, not all interior designers are expensive. Um, I think it's like we talk about finding the right builder, finding the right architect or residential designer is just do your homework. It's worth it in the beginning to spend some time doing that. I mean, you're going to be working with these people for, you know, a year to a year and a half.
and then living with the results for a long time.
Absolutely. And the best thing for us is when we get a referral from that client, because then they're super happy. And they enjoyed the process. We kept them in budget. If they went over, it was on them, and
Right.
it was, yeah, I know. I was just in the showroom and I saw that gold leaf on that tile and I just had to have it. So I know I'm going over, but I'm okay with that. And my husband and I talked about it. We're good to go. That's one excuse for going over budget.
Sure. So what's as a designer, what is your ideal client? Like, what's the perfect client to work with?
If I could get on the computer like weird science and just create the
Yes.
perfect client.
Yes.
Oh gosh. I think one for sure is somebody that can be open-minded and willing to let me throw new products out in front of you and things that maybe not at all like your inspiration photo, but based on the feedback you've given me and kind of what you're wanting things to look like, be willing to explore some of those things with me. I can't always show you a picture what it's going to look like finished, and that's a struggle, I know, but I tease them a lot of times and say, just trust me, it's why you're paying me the big bucks.
Yeah.
But so being open-minded, it makes the process fun. Understanding the budget and understanding that I'm not here to spend every last dollar of your budget, but kind of like we need to know the price, what you're willing to spend on this home. If you've got $1 million, it's great. If you've got 800, then 800 it is. But honesty and just, this is it. This is all we've got. I can't go a dollar over. We'll make it work. Flexibility, patience. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So you might spend a couple hours with me one day at an appointment, and you may not hear from me for a week, maybe 2 weeks. Don't panic. And I tell people up front, this is a process because once we get tile selections made, I've got to get pricing, all that. I've got to see where we are.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure when we were there that I think our average is going to come out okay, even though we had a $5 allowance. I know we had some that were 20, but we had some that were 3. there's a lot of time that I spend not face to face with you,
Right.
behind my computer and trying to work the magic and communicate with the builder. And maybe there's questions I have with the builder saying, listen, they want to do this, got to make sure it's not going to be more money.
Right.
They want to lay the tile in a herringbone pattern. Some builders charge more, some
Yeah.
tile setters charge more.
It's not always just the product itself. It's how it's being installed. It can be a big cost driver sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of emails going back
Yeah.
and forth, which I typically do everything via email because I want to have it documented.
Mm-hmm.
So there's emails going back and forth. There's scheduling. I mean, I've got more than one client at a time. So it's trying to schedule everybody each week and make sure I have time, that I have a day or two where I have no appointments, so I can be right behind the computer. So I think just the understanding in that and patience is a big one, and knowing that we're going to get the selections made.
Yeah. Trust the process.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So on the opposite side of that, we've all had some rough situations every once in a while. What's kind of the opposite of that? What's the non-ideal client?
The one that texts you whenever. It could be 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, could be on the weekends, could be a text during the day even. When I'm in appointments, my phone is silent and I don't see it. Many of my appointments are 2 hours long. When Steve and I are doing design criteria meetings, that could be a 3-hour appointment. I don't have my phone.
Yeah.
So,
why aren't you answering me?
yes, what happens is it'll be a phone call, leave a voicemail, then 20, 30 minutes later, it's a text. Hey, I just called. I left you a voicemail, but I really need to talk to you about such and such. And then, 3 hours later, when I finally am able to even see email, much less check voicemail and all the texts that have come in while I've been in that meeting, there's an email. Hey, I called. You didn't answer. I left you a voicemail. I also sent you a text. I'm not sure why I haven't heard back from you. Now it's going to be even longer before you hear back from me. But it's like, okay, when I was with you for 3 hours on our appointment and I wasn't answering my phone, you appreciated that.
Right.
And trust me, I was getting blown up with text messages, maybe voicemails, emails, all that, right? But it's like they just have blinders on to, and they're the only client.
Yeah.
And when okay, I'm going to check with your builder and I'll get you answers to this, this, and this. And the very next day, so did you find out what did Curtis say about this, this, and this? I said, well, first of all, we finished that conversation at 5 o'clock yesterday when we finished our appointment, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning on the next day. And I'm just now opening my computer. So Curtis doesn't even know I'm about to ask him
Yeah. So
5 questions.
That boils down to just like a respect for your time, personal space, things like that.
Absolutely. And again, it kind of goes back to just understanding the process and know you're in good hands. You hired me for a reason. I'm sure you vetted me out. You talk to people. It's going to get done. It's going to get done in a timely manner. You've talked to people who used Curtis. It's going to get done, and it's going to get done properly. Just be patient and don't drive by the house every single day and expect to see progress. There could be progress, but it might not be something that you don't even notice.
Yeah.
So I try to help you out in that regard. Tell people, don't go every day unless you just are that excited and you want to look, but just know that there are many times you're going to go that things aren't happening, but there's a reason for it. That's why I mentioned putting things in email these days.
Oh, yeah.
There have been, just when you think you got them all, every once in a while there'll be one that slips through and, well, Shannon, you're the one that said that the light fixture needed to go there. And that's why I told him to do it. It's like, I would have never put that light fixture there ever in my lifetime.
Right.
But now I'm being thrown under the bus, just it seems silly, but at the time when it's happening, it's those kinds of things that are continuing to happen with that particular type of client.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it kind of boils down to like the ideal client is someone who wants to participate in the process and who trusts the process, right? And then the opposite side of that is somebody who just doesn't want to participate, who wants to do it their way and not be an active participant kind of in the normal flow of things.
Right. And there have been clients in the past that I've had to part ways with and simply have just said, this isn't a match. This isn't working.
Yeah.
No hard feelings, but this is my process. There's a reason that I've created the process. I've worked with a lot of different custom home builders. I've kind of taken pieces of each of their processes to try and create, what I feel like is the best one. And as far as getting selections to these builders on time and what they need. So it might seem crazy to you, but there's a reason for it. And I'm not saying the way you want to do it is the wrong way. It's just not how I do it. And so we need to part ways. Because I have spent over time doing this and working with different builders. Every builder has their process. You might have a building software that you use, and there's several of them out there. And so I have to have this conversation with every time I start working with a new builder, share your preferred vendors with me. How do you want things done? When do you want selections? That sort of thing. Because to me, building a custom home, that's a really, really special opportunity in your life to get to do. Not a lot of people get to do that. And when I say custom home, we're talking, a lot of people go out and buy homes that production builders, a David Weekley or Perry Homes, some of those. And you still get to pick some things.
Right.
But it is not buying a piece of dirt and then designing whatever this home from scratch, where where every nook and cranny, that when you move in, where everything that you're bringing into that home has a place, and where that goes.
There's a reason that it's there.
Right. And I feel like it should be a little bit more of a hand-holding experience and not a rush. Let's get, we need all your selections right now. And we haven't even moved dirt.
Yeah.
And I found that custom homeowners, they need to absorb some stuff. I take them to make a selection. They go home, they think about it. They might do research on it, whether it's appliances, plumbing, they have to kind of let it sink in that, wow, we just picked all the plumbing for our house in an hour or 2 hours. I got to go back and look at the picture book that we got sent and see if are we sure we like it? Are we sure we like the finish? Right.
Yeah.
It's not just okay, that's it. Send it to the builder and now you can't change it.
Right.
So, maybe I do take a little longer in working with these clients to make selections, but I've never had a builder wait on me for a selection. And I don't specify things that have to be ordered and on a slow boat from Italy, some fancy tile. I mean, knowing when you need it, we're going to make selections that are available when you're ready to order it. But I think there is a little bit more of a white glove service when it comes to custom homes.
Definitely. So, last question: do you have any stories, any stories of kind of horror stories of things gone wrong that you could share with us, and maybe talk about how people could avoid that situation?
Oh my goodness.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I always ask people this question. I like to hear
I know
it's variety of answers.
It is fun to hear some of the horror stories. It's
I don't like
fun.
To dwell
it's
on the negative.
sad.
Yeah, I don't like to dwell on the negative too much, but it's more of like a cautionary tale of like, hey, this is the mistake these people made, and here's what you can do to not do that.
Right. Absolutely. I have had some tile nightmare stories. Unfortunately, more than one. And this goes back to, there have been a couple of projects where I've been hired midway through. They got into it. I was going to do it myself. And then,
Yep.
oh, dear Lord, I can't do this myself. But unfortunately, on some of them, I got in a little too late. So, say tile was already selected, ordered, set, and then you walk in and look at it, and it's absolutely atrocious, and it has to be all ripped out, because they're like, "There's no way I can live with this." That's a big expense. Just make sure that when your builder is sending you things to approve, if you don't understand it, um, get clarification on it. I did have a really, really nice front door. Steve and I had designed, and it had fixed windows next to it. So when you look at the home, it was pretty much all glass, right? Well, the windows and the door with the divided light I guess I explained people what divided light. So it's the dividers in the window, whether they're vertical or horizontal. These were all horizontal, more modern home. Between the windows and the front door, those horizontal metal pieces didn't line up.
Ooh.
So when you looked at Steve's drawing, it would have looked like all one unit.
Right.
Which was the goal, knowing that only one of those was actually the door. And wasn't the builder's fault, because the drawings, but from the window distributor, you and I both know what we're talking about. They're fairly small. They're a computer generated.
Usually pretty generic, actually.
Very generic. And it was pretty small. And even me looking at it, I wouldn't have caught it. I would have looked at that whole thing and said, yeah, that's our front door and the windows. And it was very expensive. And we couldn't do anything about it. The window distributor said, no, you signed off on it. And said, well, if you look at the plans, it shows this is how it's supposed to look. Clearly doesn't look like that. And it was really, really disappointing. And I have had, unfortunately, for that same client, we had some cabinet disasters on that project. And it wasn't the cabinet manufacturer, it was the distributor. And we ended up with a lien on that house from the dealer's installer. And I remember calling him saying, he was great. This installer was fantastic. And I said, are you kidding me? You cannot be putting a lien on this house. He said, Shannon, I don't know what else to do. So-and-so's not paying me. I've installed the cabinets, whatever. I said, yeah. He said, I don't know what else to do. And I ended up getting involved with his lawyer. I called his lawyer. I was like, tell me what I can do. What do we, I'll talk to this dealer who I've done business with before. Fortunately, I was able to convince him to pay his installer. Whatever money problems you're having is not your installer's fault.
Yeah.
And, the sad part is it was somebody I had used on a couple of jobs previously, and he did a great job. Unknown to me, which I didn't find out till much later, there was some major, robbing Peter to pay Paul and on these jobs. And this job just went to, I won't curse
it's a family show.
Yeah, I know. I have to remember this isn't our podcast. But yeah, it was a disaster. I mean, I felt horrible. It was my first project with this. It was actually with Steve Rudin. It's my first project with him.
Oh man.
He went out on a limb and trusted me that I'm bringing in a vendor that, was going to do a good job. It was just like, God, what else? What else? And I did have a countertop issue on that house too. It was just,
man,
it was a mess. And I just felt horrible for the homeowner,
So what, on the door, again, I always like to kind of talk about like, how could these things have been avoided? Like on the door, what could have been done to avoid the door issues, do you think?
That's what I talked to, that Steve Rudin and I talked about that. I said, this could easily happen to us again. And like I said, it wasn't his fault. It wasn't my fault. I mean, I guess realistically, maybe it wasn't the vendor's fault either, because that's how they always send their quotes out and have people sign off on them.
guess you could request a shop drawing for those doors, you know?
Yes, I think on something like that, that is what Steve and I talked about is in the future, we need something that technically is supposed to look like one complete unit. We need to see that blown up on its own page, detail with dimensions, because at that point, if we had seen that, it would have been very obvious
Right.
that it didn't line up. But, you know, we all learned a very, very hard lesson, but it won't happen again. And like I say, when you drive by the house, when you were to walk, if you walk up to their house, you would never notice.
Yeah.
Maybe you would. People of us
The
in the
average
business,
person's not
but none of their
notice.
friends would notice. No. So,
but it's a big deal when it happens.
it was one of the worst in the past. I would say 3 or 4 years of projects. That was that, and then the cabinets at the same project, and then he was doing cabinets at another project and screwed up all three. I had 2 new homes and 1 major remodel, and he was doing the cabinets on all of them and screwed all of them up. It was a mess. And obviously I felt like a big heel because I'm the one that brought him in. And again, it wasn't the cabinet line. It wasn't the manufacturer. Great cabinets. It was
the dealer.
The dealer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even, good builders, good architects, good designers, issues come up. We're all human. We make mistakes. So it's just about how we deal with that and how we handle the adversity. It's going to happen.
Absolutely. And Steve talks about that too. He said, there have been little mistakes I've made. The builder calls me and says, hey, these stairs aren't working out like they should, Yeah. And he'll drop what he's doing, go to the job site, meet with the builder and get it fixed. Oftentimes the clients don't ever know what happened.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect set of plans. I don't care how good the architect, the home designer, the interior engineer, there's no such thing as a perfect set. So it goes back to that teamwork, collaboration, and knowing that I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Steve, I found an issue on the drawings, or call the engineer, hey, Carl, I found this issue. Right. Can you and Steve both come over and let's put our heads together and figure this out?
And that's something we tell people too, is part of the team. And sometimes I forget the engineer piece of it because they're not. It's sitting in those. They're not engaged the whole
time.
But we always, when people say, "Well, who should we use for engineer?" We always say, let your builder make their recommendation. You want your builder and your engineer to have a good relationship. So if there are questions down the road, oftentimes it tends to be the same engineers. Yeah. We all kind of like the same, working with the same people. Yeah.
And we had Carl Brecken on an episode recently. And
okay.
I know that you guys had him on yours as well.
Yes.
So yeah,
Carl's great.
Been using him for a long time.
Yes, they're great. Now Reese is I've seen him on more of the emails these days.
I tried to get Reese on the show, but he was out of the country. I just wanted that Kiwi accent on the podcast.
Yeah, that would have been fun. That would have been fun.
So I said next time, Reese is coming on. So
yeah, there you go.
No offense, Carl, but
Well, you can always break them out. I know we ended up breaking out some episodes, and we had talked about just framing. For the engineering of just the framing versus the foundation. So maybe you could get him to come on for a special episode.
So that's a great segue. I mentioned, I failed to mention at the beginning of this episode that you guys have a podcast. I feel bad because I should have started off with that, early on. But,
oh my gosh, no.
But Shannon and Steve have their own podcast, which you should definitely check out as well.
Two designers and a builder walk into a bar.
Yeah, and
I got to hand it to Rudin. His wife Allie came up with that one. And we loved it.
And they're way cooler than I am because they always have cocktails.
We're not the family show, but you can still listen to it in the car. Steve Rudin, we tease him all the time because one of our earlier episodes, I think it was Meet the Host. I said a curse word, and his eyes about popped out of his head, and then he beeped me out on that episode because he's the one that goes in and adds our intro music and all that. So then I teased him after that. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, we don't edit. We just go live and whatever. And he said, oh, it's a fan, people are driving in their minivan and they're listening and then their kids are in the back seat. I said, if their kids are listening to our show, they have fallen asleep, but more than likely their kids have on headphones in the back seat and they're playing a video.
Right.
So don't worry. So yes, and we do have cocktails when we're recording.
So I definitely should come on and be a guest on your podcast.
Absolutely.
I'm inviting myself.
Yes. Well, and that's these days, that's what they say is, have guests on from other podcasts and share podcasts.
Yeah, they say that most guests on podcasts are just hosts of other podcasts. Is like this self-perpetuating thing.
Well, yes, and who we just recently had, and apparently he has done a lot of not just podcasts, but he's been on some of our local news stations talking about it. Is Energy Ogre.
Oh yeah.
That one was a fun episode, and there's a lot of. I think you would really geek out on that one.
I met
him
recently.
A lot of cool stuff.
I met him recently.
At our builder council.
I kind of forgot about him. Yeah.
Yes, talked to him. He was a great guest. Lots of great information. A lot of cool things that are coming in the near future. I think with our energy and conserving it and storing it and all that good stuff.
Awesome. So again, that's Two Designers and a Builder Walk Into a Bar. That's the name, right?
Yes. And you can find it on anywhere you can find a podcast, Apple Podcast, Amazon.
Wherever you're listening to this one, you can find it there too.
Yes, exactly. All of those.
Well, awesome. So it's been great talking to you. I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
So tell people listening and watching, if they want to work with you guys, how can they find you?
SteveShannonDesign.com will take you to what we call our landing page. And on our landing page, there are different tabs to take you to our house page, which will show you a lot of the projects that we've worked on and are working on. There's an introductory video that you can watch. Kind of tells you a brief description of what we do, why we do it the way we do it. And there's also a link to our podcast there. So
cool.
We'd love to hear from anybody that is looking for a set of house plans and a designer to go with it.
Great. Well, they should definitely give you a call and go have a cocktail with you or a cup of coffee or
hey, we've done plenty
whatever.
of meetings like that with beverages, adult beverages too. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much again. It was great having you on.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And so on our next episode next week, we'll be talking to another architect, Bradley Hurtis, and we'll talk about the importance of doing phase checks and inspections. It's a big piece that people don't think of necessarily, but it's a service they should definitely have an architect participate in to make sure that they're getting what they pay for, make sure that things are being done right. So I'm looking forward to having Bradley on next week. And once again, remember that there are 4 key components to every successful construction project. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. Have all 4 of these components and your project will succeed. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.